He spent almost 20 years inside the wedding industry. As a photographer, a speaker, and a coach, he's worked at every level of this business and watched what actually builds relationships and what quietly destroys them. This is Mastering Networking in the Wedding Industry with your host, Julian.
This is a bonus episode of the limited series on networking in the wedding industry, not part of the original 10, just something I've been sitting with for a while. I'm Julian Rabbinic, almost 20 years in this industry, mostly as a photographer, also as a speaker and a coach. The first three episodes were structured, observational, a little tough maybe, and this one is different. It's personal, so guys, stay with me. A few weeks ago, someone walked up to me at an event and said, I've tried to talk to you a couple of times. You were always with people. You looked intimidating. So I never did. And I stood there thinking, what are you talking about? Because I know what I am. I'm a guy who likes being around people. I help when I can. I show up. That's it. The idea that someone saw me and didn't approach because it seemed important and genuinely strange to me, it made me think. So today we're talking about perception, the gap between how people look from the outside and who they actually are, and how that gap is probably the single biggest reason real connections don't happen at the events. And let me back up a little bit. When I started showing up in this industry, I saw the same thing everyone sees: the known names, the people whose Instagram is everywhere, the planners speaking at every conference, the designers, everyone references, the ones who are always at the fancy resort, at the fancy event, surrounded by the right crowd. And the math my brain was doing was simple. These people are important, and I'm not. There's no reason for them to talk to me. So I didn't approach them. I'd see them from across the room and assume the conversation they were having was more interesting than anything I could offer. I'd watch the cluster around them and I decided it didn't belong. I'd convince myself that I was being respectful by not interrupting when really I was just intimidated. I was wrong about almost all of it because eventually you end up in a real conversation with one of these people, not at the event, usually later, somewhere quieter. And what you find out is they have kids. They have a marriage that has good days and bad days. They have business problems that they don't post about. They have health stuff. They have parent getting older. They have anxiety before they speak on the stage. And there's unknown people that go on stage all the time. They have weeks where the work isn't coming and they don't know why. They are people. They're just people with a lot going on, just like you. And the Instagram, the conferences, the resorts, the crowd, that's a slice of their life. Sometimes a very small slice. The rest of it looks like the rest of everyone's life. Real, messy, and human, just like you and mine. So, some of those people became very close friends, not because I networked with them, because I once stopped seeing them as a version of themselves I'd built in my head. An actual conversation became possible. And the conversation usually wasn't about work, it was about everything else. Here's where it gets strange. Several years into it, I started hearing the same thing from new people coming into the industry. Someone would tell me, I've been waiting to talk to you for months, but I was nervous. Or, you always have so many people around you, I didn't want to interrupt. Or, I saw you speaking and assumed you wouldn't have time. And every single time I think, what? Because I know exactly who I am. I'm an introvert. Talking to strangers a few years ago was genuinely hard for me. I had to learn it. I'm still learning it. The version of me that exists in someone else's head, the confident, important, surrounded by people version, that's not the version that exists when I'm home, when I'm working through a hard week, when I'm with my family, when I'm sitting in my car trying to figure out something I don't have an answer for. And the thing is, if it's not true about me, it's probably not true about most of the people you see across the room either. That's the part I want you to sit with. The room you're imagining is not the room you're actually in. The intimidating planner you can't bring yourself to walk up to is probably tired. Had a hard call earlier. Probably wishes someone would just come say hi without an agenda. The designer you assume is too important is probably wondering if anyone else here actually wants to talk to them about anything other than that they do for work. The speaker you watched on stage probably feels relieved to be off it and would love to have a normal conversation. Perception is doing a lot of work in your head, and most of it is wrong. Here's something I've noticed, and I'll say it carefully because it's a generalization, but it holds up more often than not. The people who are actually doing a lot in this industry, the real ones, they rarely perform it. They don't tell you how important they are. They don't list their wins in the first 10 minutes. They show up, they ask you about you, and then they leave. The ones who spend the most energy convincing you that they matter usually have the least going on. Real status is quiet, performance is loud. Quick aside, I think about the same dynamic in music actually. The bands I respect most, the ones who I've been, doing it for 25 years and are genuinely great, you can have a conversation with them like they are regular people because they are. The ones still trying to convince you they are rock stars are usually the ones who aren't. Same energy. Anyway, back to events. The cost of perception is real. You don't approach people you should approach. You filter yourself out of conversations before they happen. You decide who's accessible and who isn't based on optics that have almost nothing to do with the actual person. And meanwhile, the people you're avoiding are usually the easiest to talk to once you do. And I want to be clear, this isn't me telling you to walk up to every famous person at an event and assume they want to be your friend. That's not true. That's a different mistake. The mistake here is the one where you don't approach anyone at all because you decided in advance that they are above you, too busy, too important, not interested. They're not above you. They're people. They're just people who are also a person, just like you. You're a person, they're a person. That's the starting point. And this is the actual ask here. Pay attention to it. Next time you are at an event and you find yourself looking across the room thinking the person is out of my league, stop. Notice that thought. Notice that you're doing the same thing the listener I described it at the top of this episode was doing when they decided not to talk to me. Notice that the person you're imagining in your head is probably not the person who actually are. And then go say hi without an agenda, without a pitch, without asking what they do, even if you don't know or whatever, because sometimes there are people who you know they're important, but you don't really know what they do. So don't ask. Just because they're a person and you're a person and you're both in the same room. And that's enough. If the conversation is short, fine. If they're tired, fine. If they don't remember your name a week later, it's totally fine. Takes me to remember someone's name, maybe meeting them 3 times. None of that is the point. The point is you stopped letting a story you made up about someone decide who you connect with. And let me close with this. If there's one thing to take from this episode, it's this. The person you're afraid to approach is probably afraid you don't want to talk to them. Everyone is more nervous, more tired, more human than they look. Drop the version of them you've built in your head. Really. The real one is easier to be around. Always. You've been listening to a bonus episode of the limited series on mastering networking in the wedding industry. No hacks, no shortcuts, just how it actually works. I'm your host, Julian Rabbinic, and I'll see you in the next episode.